Hello and welcome. This is Dr. Conley, and I wanted to talk to you today about the theoretical perspectives. I know your assignment is based on application of these theoretical perspectives, and I want to give you at least some practical examples of how these theoretical perspectives actually operate in terms of sociology and understanding people's behavior. Now, a theory is a general statement about how parts of the world fit together. And in sociology, we use three theoretical perspectives: symbolic interactionism, functionalism/functional analysis, and conflict theory. Now, there are two levels of analysis: micro level, which looks at small scale features of societies, what kind of small scale face-to-face interactions of people, and macro level, which is broad scale features of society. Now, there's one theoretical perspective that falls under the micro level, and that's symbolic interactionism. Symbolic interactionism says that we use symbols to define relationships with one another, and it influences those relationships. An example: how many of you have heard of Gerber Baby Food? Gerber Baby Food decided to send boxes of baby food to a very impoverished country in the world where there's a lot of hunger. What they found was that the mothers were not feeding this food to their babies, and they couldn't understand why. Now, let me ask you this. When you go into a grocery store and you go down the canned vegetable aisle and you want a can of spinach, how do you identify a can of spinach? You see a label with a picture of spinach on it. Let's say you go in the canned vegetable aisle and you want a can of fruit, canned peaches. How do you identify a can of peaches? There's usually a label with a picture of peaches on it. Now, what's on the label of a jar of Gerber baby food? There's a picture of a baby. Yes, you're laughing, and yes, that did happen. What the mothers thought was, what we see on the outside label is what's on the inside of the jar. They thought it was the baby, the picture of that cute little baby. They thought that baby was what was ground up and in the jar for them to feed their babies, which they didn't use. Okay, that's symbolic interactionism. We laugh, but is that not logical? What's on the outside is what's on the inside. A picture paints 1,000 words, and there are different symbolic interpretations of the picture. And in this case, it defined the relationship in terms of the food distributor giving food and people not eating the food. That was how that particular relationship was defined. That's one example of symbolic interactionism. Let me give you another. How many of you have heard of the car, the Chevy Nova? It was a hot-selling car in the United States. So Chevrolet said, wow, it's selling so great here. Why don't we go sell the car in Latin American countries? So they got distribution and, put the cars on the lots in Latin American countries, but people were not buying the car. And they were like, it's a hot car in the United States. Why isn't it selling here? Anyone who speaks Spanish? Nova. No vas. No go. People thought it was a Chevy that didn't run. That interpretation of the word influenced the relationship between the car maker and the car buyer. The car buyers did not buy the car based on the word. Symbolically, the interpretation of the word of the name of the car defined that relationship. Those are two examples of symbolic interactionism. Now, that's on a micro level. On a macro level, you have the two theoretical perspectives. The first I want to talk about is functionalism. Functional analysis says that society is a whole unit made up of interrelated parts. And when all those parts are working together, you have a very smooth running society. But if one part is not working properly, it's going to impact and create imbalance and disorder in other areas of the society. Think about a car and its parts. You can name, I'm sure, probably more parts than I. But if the brakes aren't working, you can't drive the car. If the tire is flat, you can't ride it. If the engine's not working, the car won't go. Okay? But when all the parts are working smoothly, you have a smooth running car that will get you from point A to B. Now, how does this work in society? I'll give you a brief example. Think about the housing market. A lot of people are losing their homes. Housing, schools, police, retail, restaurants, jobs. Okay. Now, people are losing their homes. there was a history. I don't know if you want to look at the subprime mortgage market and how that created, balloon payments on mortgages, and people just couldn't afford to keep their homes. But if people aren't owning homes, then they're not paying real estate property tax. And a lot of that tax revenue went into things like schools, police, fire departments. And if you notice, there are schools closing, there are police and fire departments getting laid off. And I think some of you are even interested in some medical fields or some very medical specialties. Medical. And I'll explain that one in a second. I just thought about adding that one. So if people are fighting and trying to hold on to keep their pennies to keep their homes, they're not going to have money to go out into the stores and buy different items. What do you see? Stores closing. Restaurants. Think about when you drive by the mall or restaurants that used to be around that aren't around anymore. Restaurants closing. Well, what does that ultimately mean? Jobs. Now, a lot of times on jobs, one of the big things everybody wants are benefits. If you don't have benefits, you may not have insurance. You're not able to pay for medical. I know private practice medical professionals that have felt the crunch because companies are no longer, and all their workers who used to come for regular routine dental appointments aren't there. So even medical has been affected by this. Okay? But that's how functionalism works. If society as a whole, people holding on to their houses, there's money for schools, police and fire, everything's okay there. People have jobs, money to eat out, money to travel, money to shop, money to go and take care of medical needs. Okay, all of that. Once again, society is a whole unit made up of interrelated parts. If one part is out of sync, it can impact the rest. Now, lastly, conflict theory. Conflict theory is also on a macro level, and it's the one that Karl Marx embraced. And what conflict theorists say is that in society, you have groups of people competing for scarce resources. Think about a pie. Sorry, I hope you're not hungry right now. You have a pie. What a conflict theorist says is that 2 to 3% of the population has this big chunk of the pie. You may have celebrities, millionaires, CEOs, executives. Then you have these crumbs down here. This may be a $150,000, $200,000 job, even one of these little crumbs. What conflict theorists say is, how does this scenario impact how and why people are behaving in the manner in which they behave? They look at who is getting hired, who gets the jobs, who isn't getting the jobs, based on things like age, gender, education level, race, you name it. Okay? And if you think in Philadelphia, when there was a casino that recently opened, I believe there were 15 to 20,000 people that applied for 1,000 jobs. Even in the state of, I think it was Kansas, somewhere in the Midwest, there was one school janitor position. 500 people stood online for this one position. And everybody from PhDs to MDs to MBAs to no Ds all stood online for this one job. And what conflict theorists would say is, who is looking for the jobs? Who is getting the jobs? Even in a particular organization, how do promotions work? Who gets promoted? Is it based on gender? Is it based on X? Is it based on Y? But he says that the conflict theorists say that the scarce resources and the competition and how people are constantly focused on competing to, even when you're in a job, keep that job. All of that kind of falls under what a conflict theorist would say in terms of looking at behavior. They'd also look at how people in the 2 to 3% that may have this big chunk, how they go about holding on to this piece of the pie. Okay? That's how conflict theorists work. I hope I didn't talk about pie too much, because now I want a slice. Alrighty, this is Dr. Conley checking in, and I will see you next week. Take care.